Every morning, the valley of Elah shook. It wasn't an earthquake. They were the footsteps of 60 kilos of molten bronze marching against the beaten earth. Goliath of Gath was not just a tall man. He was a fortress of flesh and iron. His spear, too heavy for an ordinary man to lift, cut through the air with the promise of death. For 40 days, his brutal voice echoed in the hills, tearing at Israel's pride with words of pure sadism and arrogance. He was the champion, the undefeated monster that had already stained the soil of Canaan with the blood of dozens of warriors. But behind that impenetrable armor, the giant's own body guarded a silent trap. If we look closely at the deep footprints left in the earth, we begin to understand who this man really was. Goliath of Gath was not a myth or a demon out of nowhere. He was a soldier, the champion chosen by the Philistines, a warrior people who came from the sea and brought the secret of iron to rewrite the destiny of those lands. In that arena of dust and blood, his role was to be an insurmountable wall, the absolute certainty of victory for his army and terror personified for his enemies. But when we strip the suspect of all that shiny bronze armor, what's left is someone frighteningly human. Goliath was a man imprisoned by his own size, shaped since childhood to be a weapon of biological destruction, silently carrying the pain and isolation of a body that betrayed him every day. He went up that valley convinced that he was fulfilling his duty and doing what was right to protect his people, without knowing that his worst enemy was not wearing armor and that his own pride had already decreed his sentence. From now on, we will descend into the depths of this valley to reveal what traditional accounts chose to ignore. You will discover that the greatest weakness of the most feared man of antiquity was not his lack of protection, but rather the hidden gears of his own biology and the disturbing silence that precedes his fall. There is a secret kept between the lines of the sacred text, an uncomfortable truth about the day when iron and human pride were completely disarmed by what no one could see, because the worst blindness is not the one that erases the eyes, but the one that deceives the soul into believing that it is invincible. If you want to understand what really happened on that tar and blood-stained ground, stay with me until the end. And if this kind of deep journey makes sense to you, consider joining us here on the channel so we can continue delving into the more visceral and forgotten sides of history. Let's move on. If we remove the fog of myth for a moment and look at this confrontation through the lens of past investigators, a surprising picture begins to emerge. In recent decades, scholars and scientists have begun to open the archives of ancient medicine to try to understand what was behind that monumental stature. It was Israeli neurologist Vladimir Bergener, along with renowned author Malcolm Gladwell, who popularized a fascinating and respected hypothesis that Goliath suffered from a real medical condition called acromegaly. It is essential to make it clear that we are talking about a study, a scientific hypothesis that does not annul the sovereignty of the sacred text, but that sheds a surgical light on the clues that the Bible itself left scattered in the dust of the valley. Far from diminishing the story, this medical perspective helps us reconstruct the exact anatomy of a condemned man. What theology records as an invincible colossus, medical science analyzes as a body operating under crushing biological pressure. Let's analyze the evidence that supports this line of investigation, going back 30 years before the confrontation to the gloom of the streets of Gath. The Valley of Elah is not just a piece of land forgotten by time. It's an open wound in history. If you close your eyes, you can almost hear the sound. Not the sound of swords clashing, but the sound of absolute fear. Fear has a noise of its own. He hides in the whisper of the piercing wind that punishes the dry vegetation of the hills. It travels in the crunch of dust beneath the boots of thousands of paralyzed men. Two immense armies are facing each other, separated by a deep depression in the rock. On one side, the ranks of Israel, field men, shepherds, peasants, transformed into soldiers in a hurry. They breathe short. Cold sweat runs down their foreheads, mixing with the soot from the extinguished fires. On the other side, the Philistine war machine, silent, relentless, technological. They master iron. They dominate death, but none of them move. 40 days ago, no one dared to take the first step. The scenery appears frozen in a dark photograph, a high-contrast image where the midday sunlight appears to have no strength to dispel the heavy shadows that cover the valley. And then, the ground shakes. It's a rhythmic impact, heavy, dry, spaced. It's the sound of 60 kilos of molten bronze marching against packed earth. The silhouette emerging from the morning mist does not look human. It tears through the light like a massive block of stone carved for destruction. Goliath of Gath advances to the edge of the valley. His every movement makes the metal of his scale armor sizzle, a sharp metallic sound that cuts through the silence like a blade. He stops. The colossal spear is driven into the ground with a muffled crash. The thick wooden pole vibrates. The iron spike, too heavy for an ordinary man to lift, shines eerily in the dull sun. Goliath takes a deep breath. The monumental chest expands, and when he opens his mouth, his voice is not a scream. It's a physical bang, a shockwave that crashes against the rocks of the valley and echoes in the walls of the mind of every soldier in Israel. He scoffs, he curses, he defies the living God. The sadism in his words is palpable, rustic, cruel. He demands an opponent for life and death combat. One man against one man. Whoever wins takes the fate of two nations. But the invitation remains unanswered. Nobody goes. Saul, the warrior king of Israel, is locked in his leather tent, trembling, helpless. The pride of an entire nation is being trampled into the dust twice a day in the face of a monster that seems invincible. The sky over the Valley of Elah remains gray, heavy, and mute. It is the silence of God, a silence that lasts 40 long days. For the Philistines, this silence is the final proof that they have won. For Goliath, it is validation that he is a god on earth. This is the crime scene that history has sold us for generations. The arrogant giant against the cowards on the hill. But if we remove the fog of myth and look closely at the evidence, the picture changes. We began to notice small cracks in the structure of that iron fortress. Our investigation begins now, in the gloom of that arena of blood and tar. We need to retrace the steps of this lonely champion. We need to examine the records hidden beneath the bronze shield. Because behind the half-closed eyes of that heaven-defying monster, a destructive biological secret hid. A silent trap set by your own body. The giant was marching to his death, but not in the way everyone imagined. Let's shine a light on Gath's past. Let's open the archives of ancient medicine and archaeology to understand the anatomy of a condemned man. The spiritual autopsy of the Valley of Elah is about to begin. To understand the end of a man in the Valley of Elah, we must first return to the place where he was broken. Our investigation takes us 30 years before the confrontation, far from the hills of Israel. We are in the streets of Gath, one of the 5 great city-states of the Philistines. The scenery here is heavy, suffocating. The air has a bitter taste. There are no forests or green fields here. The horizon is dominated by immense walls made of dry clay bricks, the so-called mud brick, which retain the suffocating heat of the desert. If you walk down these narrow alleys in the dim light, the dominant sound is not that of human voices or children playing. It's the sound of metal being punished, the rhythmic, deafening echo of heavy hammers striking raw iron in the underground forges. The Philistines, the mysterious sea peoples who colonized this coast, brought with them a technological secret that frightened the rest of the world: the mastery of advanced metallurgy. From the chimneys of these foundries, dark, thick smoke rises, with the characteristic smell of bitumen and burnt pitch. It is a cold, industrial atmosphere where human life is measured by its usefulness in the gears of war. And it was exactly in this environment that the suspect was born. But he wasn't born to have a childhood. Ancient records indicate that Goliath did not belong to the common lineage of the Philistines. He was a survivor of the Rephaim, an ancient race of men of enormous stature who once populated the region and who were now almost extinct. Since that baby's first cry in the shadows of a mud house, the elders of Gath have not seen a son there. There was no celebration for the arrival of a new life. There was no common nurturing of a mother. They saw a property, a high-value military asset, a biological weapon that needed to be shaped, forged, and hardened before nature itself could do its work. Imagine the reconstruction of this youth, while the other boys in the city learned to fish, to trade in the markets of Gath, or to mold clay. That giant child spent his days confined in the dirt courtyards of the military garrisons. The boy was growing up too fast, a terrifying speed that defied the laws of human biology. But here is the first big twist that the story official hid under the carpets of myth: that growth was not a gift from the gods. It was a biological curse. Modern science looks at Goliath's skeleton and makes an accurate diagnosis: acromegaly, a crushing deformity caused by a benign but highly destructive tumor lodged in the pituitary gland, at the very base of the brain. In classic preaching, gigantism is painted as a comic book superpower. Factual reality, however, smells of medicine, sweat, and agony. Goliath's accelerated growth meant that his bones stretched much faster than his muscles and tendons could keep up. Imagine a 12-year-old boy who was already the size of 2 grown men, whose joints were constantly inflamed, swollen, operating under absurd pressure. Every step taken in those courtyards of Gath was accompanied by a sharp crack and a stab of pain deep in the knees and hips. At night, while the city slept in the silence of the desert, the young giant remained awake, lying on the cold stone floor, feeling his own skeleton throbbing. The tumor in his head grew millimeter by millimeter, pressing on the walls of his skull and causing searing headaches. the kind that make vision dark and cause violent nausea. He lived in a private hell of chronic pain. But the Philistine generals did not care about his pain. They needed the machine ready. There was brutal psychological pressure on that young man's shoulders. He realized very early that if he showed any weakness, if he cried because of joint pain, or if he succumbed to the migraines that paralyzed him in the shadows, he would be discarded like a foundry scrap. He didn't have the option to be weak. He was taught to channel all that physical agony into rage. Every sword blow he delivered against the training dummies in the barracks was an attempt to stifle the pain that consumed his body from the inside. Little by little, young Goliath made a crucial human decision. A decision based on pure psychological survival. He realized that his anatomy had condemned him to be a monster in the eyes of the world. So, he decided to be the greatest of them all. If his life would be short and painful, he would make it unforgettable. He embraced his bloody fate. He trained his sick body to endure the unbearable. He learned to ignore the warning signals his own nervous system sent, and transformed his deformed carcass into an impenetrable fortress of muscles and scars. When he finally reached adulthood, the blacksmiths of Gath designed his masterpiece, cast bronze armor, 60 kilograms of metal cut into overlapping scales. When traditional soldiers looked at Goliath wearing that monumental costume, they saw a display of pure vanity, arrogance, and imperial power. But our investigation reveals something much darker. That heavy armor was not for show. She was a necessity. It functioned almost like a mechanical exoskeleton, a metal frame that supported a worn-out spinal column and kept upright a body that, inside, was collapsing under its own weight. Goliath used bronze to hide his agony. He used the fear he caused in others to mask the terror he felt at his own physical decline. He became the Champion of Gath, the solitary warrior who entered the arenas to resolve entire wars in a single combat, sparing the blood of his people by spilling the blood of his enemies with his gigantic hands. He firmly believed he was doing what was right, defending the survival of the nation that adopted him as a weapon. Now, the Philistine war machine was ready. He had survived the forging of Gath. He had silenced the pain within the bronze armor, but the tumor at the base of his brain continued to grow in the darkness, silent, relentless, and was about to exact the ultimate price for its immense strength. Because while Goliath walked towards the valley of Elah with the certainty that he was an invincible god of iron and flesh, the biological clock of his own destruction had already begun to tick. And the first symptom of this countdown began to manifest itself in the most frightening way possible. In the dim light of his own vision, the sun begins to slowly rise above the horizon, but the light that reaches the valley of Elah brings no heat. It only brings a gray, cold light that draws long shadows on the packed earth. The morning mist floats low over the ground, covering the soldiers' boots like a shroud of smoke. This is where our reconstruction takes on the shape of a suffocating psychological thriller. We enter the second chapter of this tragedy, the 40 days of silence. On one side of the valley, on the slopes of the hill, the Israeli army observes the scene in sepulchral silence. Men grip their wooden spears so tightly that their knuckles are white. They are paralyzed. The fear there is not just an emotion. It is a physical presence that tightens the chest and makes it difficult to breathe. And the reason for this collective panic is about to emerge from the fog on the Philistine side. The floor registers that rhythmic and heavy impact again. Goliath comes down the hill, twice a day, every morning and every afternoon. The ritual is repeated with mathematical precision. But if you look closely at the suspect through the lens of this investigation, you'll begin to notice that his famous sadistic arrogance wasn't just a personality trait. It was a refined psychological warfare tactic, a thick mask designed to protect his own decay. Goliath advances to the middle of the natural arena. He knows that every misstep on the uneven ground could be fatal to his inflamed joints, so he walks in an imposing but calculated manner. He slams the iron tip of his colossal spear against the bronze shield. The sound echoes like canned thunder off the valley walls. And then he starts talking. The voice, amplified by the natural acoustics of the mountains and the giant's monumental rib cage, rips through the air. He's not just challenging an army. He is humiliating the identity of those people. He mocks the soldiers' weakness, laughs at King Saul's despair, and directly challenges the God in whom they place their faith. To those listening from afar, it seems like the height of human power. But for those who investigate the facts, that verbal aggressiveness was the definitive shield. Goliath needed the fight to end before it even started. He needed terror to paralyze Israel so that no warrior would dare come down and test the real limits of a body that inside was already operating at the absolute limit of physical exhaustion. The giant's pride was his most efficient armor, and the consequence of this strategy is devastating. The Israeli army goes into mental collapse. King Saul, the tallest man in Israel, the one who should lead the charge, is locked in the confines of his leather tent, trembling, helpless, covering his ears so as not to hear the insults that cross the valley. It is the perfect picture of human impotence, faced with an iron monster that seems indestructible. The logic of the flesh says that defeat is inevitable. It is at this point that the narrative gains its deepest and most painful layer. Israel's soldiers cry out. They murmur desperate prayers in the dim light of their tents. They look to the sky waiting for a sign, a lightning bolt, a miraculous turnaround. But the sky over the valley of Elah remains closed, gray, heavy, mute. God does not respond. There are no prophets bringing messages of victory from the front lines. There is no fire falling from the sky to consume the blasphemer. There are 40 days of disturbing, drawn-out silence that seems to crush the last drops of hope that remained in the hills of Israel. For the Philistine army, each day that passes without a divine response is confirmation that their iron gods are superior. For Goliath, the silence of the heavens operates as a dangerous validation. He begins to believe in his own immortality. If the God of Israel does not consume him, it is because no one in the universe has the power to stop him. The lack of response creates blind pride in the heart of Gath's champion. He feels like he owns the valley, owner of time, owner of the destiny of those two nations. He makes decisions based on the absolute certainty that the scenario will never change, without understanding that God's silence is not an absence, but rather the space of time where human pride stretches to the point of breaking. Goliath savors the height of his psychological terror, marching back to his tent to the applause of his people, believing that the war has already been won without him needing to shed a single drop of sweat. The pride trap was perfectly set. The giant had gained absolute control of the minds of his enemies, but as he prepared for another day of insults in the arena of Elah, the hidden tumor in his brain continued its silent and destructive march, setting the stage for the next block of our investigation. Because in the darkness of that same tent where the champion rested, his peripheral vision was going completely dark, and the most feared man on earth was about to discover that he was surrounded by shadows that his brute strength would never be able to dispel. Inside the main tent of the Philistine camp, sunlight can barely penetrate. It is in this darkness that the hypothesis defended by doctors and researchers gains its greatest strength. If we follow Dr. Vladimir Bergener's line of investigation, the true horror that the giant tried to hide from everyone and from himself was not the headache. That was what was happening to his eyes because of the growth of the pituitary tumor. The CI science calls this bitemporal hemianopia, a severe loss of peripheral vision. And the most fascinating thing is to see how this medical theory fits in an almost surgical way with the textual details that the biblical account makes a point of recording. The Bible does not use modern medical terms, but it perfectly describes the practical symptoms of a man who needed a guide and who saw the world in a double-edged way. Inside the main tent of the Philistine camp, sunlight can barely penetrate. The environment is dominated by chiaroscuro, that raw, torn lighting where shadows seem to swallow the corners of the space. The air inside is stuffy, heavy with the smell of animal fat and the tar used to seal the joints of iron weapons. It is in this shadowy scenario that our medical and textual investigation finds definitive proof. We enter Block 3, the indented darkness. If you could observe the suspect closely at this very moment, away from the eyes of his army, you would see a completely different image of the invincible hero. Goliath sits on a low wooden bench, his gigantic hands pressing to his temples. Migraines caused by a pituitary tumor are devastating, but the real horror that the giant tries to hide from everyone and from himself is not the headache. It's what's happening to your eyes. The tumor in the pituitary gland grew so much that it began to expand upwards, crushing the optic chiasm, the exact point where the nerves in the eyes cross before carrying images to the brain. The medical consequence of this is a silent and terrible condition called bitemporal hemianopsia. Goliath is losing his peripheral vision. He can no longer see what is on the sides. His world was reduced to a narrow, dark tunnel. To see something that is next to him, he has to turn his entire torso heavily. He is literally walking in the darkness inside his own armor. And this is where the biblical text of 1 Samuel turns into a surgical investigation report. The Bible does not use the medical term blind, but it leaves criminal clues scattered across the land for anyone who knows how to read. The first piece of evidence is the companion. The sacred text records very clearly a detail that most people miss. Goliath's squire walked ahead of him. Think about the military logic of the time. Goliath was the most feared man on earth, a living fortress of bronze. Why did the most powerful warrior in the world need a smaller soldier walking in front of him, carrying a shield in an open, flat valley. He didn't need protection. He needed a guide. The squire was the guide dog of that war machine, the man in charge of signaling where the holes were, the loose stones on the ground, and where the giant should direct his sick body. The second piece of evidence is even more disturbing and reveals loss of focus and blurred vision. When the final confrontation approaches and the opponent finally comes down the hill, the Bible records Goliath's cry of indignation. He looks at the silhouette that walks towards him and shouts, "Am I a dog, that you come at me with sticks?" Pay attention to the word, pause, in the plural. But the historical and textual record makes it clear that David carried only a single shepherd's staff in his hand. Goliath saw double. The tumor was already affecting the optic nerve to such an extent that his central vision was completely blurred, duplicating objects in the bright midday light. He saw figures, distorted and confused images. There is a profound human tragedy in this reconstruction of facts. Goliath made the decision to blindly trust his physical strength, his heavy weapons, and the fear that his size caused. He believed that control of the situation was in his hands simply because no one had the courage to challenge him. He saw himself as the valley's ultimate predator, without realizing that his main survival tool, his ability to see danger, was dying irreversibly behind that bronze visor. Gath's champion was imprisoned in his own biology. He was about to enter the most important arena of his life, relying entirely on tunnel vision, unable to perceive what was moving outside his restricted field of vision. Tensions in the valley of Elah now reach boiling point. The 40-day silence is about to be broken. The Philistines begin to shout and bang their swords against their shields, announcing that the giant is descending for another day of humiliation. Goliath stands up, adjusts the heavy helmet that squeezes his aching head, and follows his squire's back into the blinding light of the sun. He doesn't know, but the silhouette that is about to enter that dark tunnel of his vision is not afraid of his size, and the clash between the man who trusts in iron and the boy who moves through the invisible will see the fate of that soil. The midday sun splits the land of the valley of Elah. The fine dust rising from the ground shines in the bright light, creating a suffocating, golden haze between the two hills. Goliath lumbers forward, the metal of his scale armor crackling with each short step. His eyes are half closed, fighting against the blinding light that bounces off the bronze and against the lateral darkness that insists on closing his field of vision. He focuses all his attention on the blurred silhouette that has just crossed the Israeli defense line and begins to descend the slope. We enter Block 4, the clash of two realities. For the Giant of Gath, what he is seeing through his tunnel vision is almost a personal insult. Not a warrior. He doesn't wear 60-pound armor, doesn't carry a 7-pound spear, and doesn't have scars from ancient battles covering his body. What moves towards him is just the slight silhouette of a young shepherd. David enters the arena of blood and tar without the weight of metal, without the sound of clashing weapons, and without the fear that paralyzed the rest of his people. He brings a certainty in his eyes that physical strength cannot explain. Here, the narrative reaches its most dramatic point. revealing the absolute confrontation between two irreconcilable worldviews. On the one hand, Goliath embodies the culmination of human effort, the triumph of iron technology, the pride of a monumental biology, and the blind trust in what the senses can control. He spent his entire life making decisions based on what his hands could crush and what his size dictated. He does what he believes is right, marching forward, using psychological terror, and trusting that flesh and bronze are the only realities that determine who lives and who dies. On the other hand, David perfectly justifies the message that the pages of history and the sacred text wanted to immortalize. He is not there to test his own strength against the giants. He doesn't trust his biology and refuses King Saul's iron weapons. David moves through something invisible, while Goliath relies on the size of his muscles and the weight of his sword. The young shepherd moves by absolute dependence on divine decree. He descends into the valley not as a hero seeking glory, but as the surgical instrument sent to break the pride of an entire nation and prove that man's strength is perfectly fragile in the face of what human eyes cannot see. The tension grows with every second the two get closer. Goliath, feeling humiliated by Israel's choice, lets his arrogance reach the top. He stops, rests his body weight on his inflamed joints, and begins to scream his last threats, promising to deliver the boy's flesh to the birds of the sky and the beasts of the field. His brutal voice echoes once again across the hills, eliciting shouts of derision from the Philistine army. He is absolutely certain that the outcome will be the same as all his past battles: a quick, violent, and silent massacre in the dust. The giant makes its final move. He orders his squire to step aside and begins to march in a straight line, raising his colossal spear to deliver the coup de grace. He trusts his straight line. He trusts his tunnel vision. But his reflexes are severely slowed, sabotaged by the tumor destroying his brain from the inside. Goliath does not realize that David is not playing the traditional game of ancient warfare. The shepherd will not wait for the swords to clash. David starts running. The movement is fast, agile, almost imperceptible to the giant's blurry eyes. The young man reaches into his leather saddlebag, takes a smooth stone from the stream, and fits it onto the rope of his sling. As the monster lumbers forward, the sound of leather cutting through the air at high speed begins to whistle in the middle of the valley. The projectile is spinning, accumulating deadly energy, ready to be launched right into the dead zone of Goliath's vision, the dark periphery he could no longer see. Gath's fate is about to be sealed at the speed of a gunshot. The dust in the valley of Elah appears to freeze in the air for a tenth of a second. The whir of the leather sling reaches its highest frequency, a sharp hiss that cuts through the din of Philistine screams. David lets go of one end of the rope. The smooth stone, shaped by the waters of the stream, is thrown into space with the force and precision of a modern projectile, traveling at more than 150 kilometers per hour. We enter Block 5, the anatomy of the fall. Everything happens outside the giant's field of vision. The stone travels diagonally, coming exactly from that dark periphery, from that blind area caused by the tumor that Goliath hid so much. The monster's reflexes, slowed by intracranial pressure, do not respond in time. He cannot lift the bronze shield. He can't turn his head away. The impact is dry, rustic, brutal. A rocha hits the frontal bone of the skull, right in the middle of the forehead, in the only vulnerable spot that the bronze helmet left exposed. The sound of bone crunching echoes through the valley like the snapping of a dried twig in the darkness. The stone penetrates deeply into the flesh, destroying the frontal lobe and reaching the nerve center of that biological fortress. The scene unfolds in an almost choreographic slow motion. Time stops on the slopes. Goliath's eyes, which spent 40 days focused on pride and arrogance, completely lose their shine, turning to emptiness. The 7-kilo spear escapes his gigantic fingers, falling first to the earth with a dull thud. His monumental legs, which have supported 60 pounds of bronze and a lifetime of joint pain, bend like two wind-whipped columns of sand. The monster collapses forward. The impact of his almost 3-meter body against the ground makes the packed earth truly shake. It is the sound of the collapse of an empire. The bronze of the scale armor clashes against the stones of the valley, scattering dust and tar everywhere. The champion of Gath is stretched out in the mud, his face sunk in the same dust he swore to stain with the blood of Israel. The silence that settles in the valley of Elah is suffocating, a heavy void where no man dares to breathe. David doesn't hesitate. He runs over to the mass of fallen flesh and metal. The young shepherd climbs onto the chest of Goliath's bronze armor, the same exoskeleton that held that sick body. David doesn't have a sword of his own, so he reaches out and pulls out the giant's own heavy blade, which was still attached to the scabbard at the corpse's waist. The metal slides with a screeching sound. The final act is not just a military victory. It is the execution of a spiritual verdict. David raises Goliath's sword with both hands and with a violent blow seals the giant's fate. The monster's thick, dark blood runs through the earth of the valley, mixing with the dust and dry tar. David lifts the champion's decapitated head by its long hair, displaying it in the relentless midday sun to both armies. This brutal and visceral image perfectly justifies the closure of the biblical message. The exposure of Goliath's ruin was not a celebration of cruelty, but the visual seal that all human effort, all iron technology, all arrogance based on physical strength and biology are perfectly fragile before the God who breaks the silence at the right time. The man who considered himself a god on earth was reduced to a headless body, disgraced in the dust of a forgotten valley. Gath's pride was turned to ashes, leaving the Philistine army in absolute panic, running for their lives as they realized that their great biological weapon was, after all, just vulnerable flesh. The image of that colossal armor, empty on the ground, and the champion's head exposed to the sun, marked the end of a story, but open a deep wound in our own reality. The story of Goliath repeats itself every day in silence within each of us. How many times have we spent years building heavy armor of pride, control, and arrogance to hide from others and from ourselves our pain, our weaknesses, and our greatest weaknesses? How many times do we make absolute decisions based purely on what our eyes can see and our own strength, completely ignoring that we are walking blind with tunnel vision towards our own abyss? God's silence for 40 days in the valley of Elah was not absence. It was the time given for the examination of the soul. Goliath trusted in the bronze, iron, and size that the world gave him, and so he never saw the stone traveling towards him. He did what he believed to be right, trapped by his own pride, and that leaves us in front of an uncomfortable mirror. In what armor have you trusted your life as you walk through your own valley? What are you trying to hide with the noise of your own shield? In the end, history doesn't give us easy answers. It just leaves us alone with our choices. If this investigation touched your soul in some way and made you see this story from a perspective you had never imagined, I have a simple request for you. Write the word veil here in the comments. It's a silent way for me to know that you walked with us until the last second of this journey. And if you feel that this place, with these unfiltered and visceral reflections, makes sense for your life, I invite you to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next cases we're going to open. If there is someone in your life who needs to hear this silence today, share this video. The case of the Valley of Elah is closed, but our own reconstruction continues. Until next time.